Oh, kia ora tātou, and thank you very much, Penelope. I must say I have a strong sense of divided loyalty speaking here today. I've always been a passionate supporter of the Fulbright program ever since I was lucky enough to go off to Harvard, and where it changed my life. And I've always believed that that kind of international exchange is a hugely rewarding thing. So it's great to be here under the auspices of the Fulbright program, but it's also nice, I have to say, to be back in my old workplace in the Ministry for Culture and Heritage, Manasutu Taonga. I'm a bit nervous to see a number of people here from the ministry who can probably correct and add and edit appropriately some of the things I'm going to say, although at least they'll keep me honest. But it's great to see them here. I mean, the best thing, without a doubt, about working for Te Ara, and the thing that I have to say I'm most proud of, was that we developed an absolutely fantastic team of people who gave their absolute life for this project, and it was a joy for 12 years to be with those people. So it's a great thrill for me to be back here amongst this community again. And indeed, I'm going to draw on their skills, because at the end of last year, what we did was got together and dividing up different sections, did a short history of Te Ara, which we put up on the website. So I'm going to draw on that extensively. And that is the front page of it. So let me just, what I'm going to do is simply go through the story as I experienced it. I have to say, my initial thought of doing an encyclopedia of New Zealand was of great scepticism, great doubts, and I thought to myself, I don't want to have anything to do with such a project. Now, of course, government has been involved in many reference works ever since the centennial of 1940 centennial, and in 1966 it did publish this Encyclopedia of New Zealand, McClintock's Encyclopedia, where they printed in 3 volumes 30,000 copies, all of which sold within a month, and then they never reprinted. That's the way government worked in those days. That was government print. And ever since that came out, it was a huge success. People have said it was great, but it's out of date. We need a new version. And as early as 1983, Ian Wards was asked to prepare a scoping study on an updated version, but nothing happened. And then I became chief historian in 1989, and Michael Bassett, an old historian, was very keen to do everything possible in his short term as Minister for Internal Affairs of giving as much help to public history as he could, which was a great time, I have to say, to take over as chief historian. And one of the things he did was I suddenly picked up the phone and he said, I'm giving you $200,000 for a new Encyclopedia of New Zealand. And my heart fell. We had just started doing a historical atlas of New Zealand, which was quite a big project. 1 volume of the Dictionary of New Zealand Biography had come out. This was in early 1990. In fact, it mightn't even have been launched by then, but certainly 1 had been completed in preparation, but there were another 4 to go. And I simply didn't think that the intellectual resources of the country could stomach doing a new encyclopedia. And let alone my energy levels. I'd just taken over as chief historian. I had lots of ideas about things I wanted to do. And the thought of sitting down and doing an encyclopedia, which my initial instinct was, what a boring thing to do. You've got to sit through, read a lot of secondary sources, put together, brief entries. You're not really allowed to be too provocative. You're not really doing a lot of research. Not my thing. I wanted to do research-based, exciting, interpretive history, and this seemed the very reverse of it. So I thought, no way. But we had the 1993 women's suffrage year coming up, so I thought, I know what we'll do. We'll use that 200,000 to produce a encyclopedia about women, which we did, a book called Women Together, which was an encyclopedia of women's organisations, and I presented it as the first stage towards an encyclopedia of New Zealand. So as far as Treasury was concerned, that was fine. As far as my energy levels were concerned, it was good. And I thought, well, that's the end of the encyclopedia project in my mind. I've put that aside. Well, then, about 6 or 7 years later, the Historical Atlas of New Zealand was completed, and here is Tauranga Amo launching it on the very day, actually, when Jim Bolger was rolled. He had actually come along to launch it, so it was quite a sort of I've never seen so much press coverage of a book launch in my life, but it was all on close-ups of Jim Bolger's face as he walked into the Grand Hall. So that was finished, and it began to, and by this stage the 3 more volumes, I think, of the dictionary had come out, and it became clear that the dictionary was going to finish. The last volume was going to be finished in the year 2000. So I began to realise that actually the intellectual resources of the country were actually in a better state to do an encyclopedia. And quite a number of people started to lobby me as chief historian, including a number of publishers, about the fact that was needed a new encyclopedia of New Zealand. So I put in a budget bid for an encyclopedia of New Zealand that would be a 3-volume print production, just a repeat, basically, of the old 1966 encyclopedia, print volume. And it got turned down. And the next year, in 1999, really led by Jamie Mackay, we launched a website, New Zealand History Net NZ. This is the early home page of it, and I was absolutely staggered by the kind of public response that it had. Within a year or so, there were 50,000 visitors a month on that site, and it got me thinking. I thought, well, this is a completely new mechanism, a new way of communicating history. So, the more I looked at the web, the more I began to realise that if you were going to do a new encyclopedia, the web was the way to do it. It had huge, huge advantages. So I put up a new budget proposal, this time based on the assumption that it would be a web-based encyclopedia. Judith Tizard, who was Associate Minister, was keen, and she set up a meeting with Michael Cullen. She gave me a half hour. And what we did was, I prepared a bit of a mock-up. And this is what I took along. And basically, it was a thing on shore whaling, and so we had a text in here, and along the thing I had P for places you could visit, I was for images, D was for documents, S was for sounds, I'm not quite sure what sounds you have, and M was for maps. So this was a sort of an attempt to convince him, but I realised that actually Michael Cullen, was a historian by background and an academic, and that the real issue as far as he was concerned would probably be not the value of an encyclopedia, but the fact that it was a digital encyclopedia, not a book encyclopedia. And I suspected that he would be highly suspicious. I also suspected, in fact I knew, that the Prime Minister at the time, who was the Minister for Arts, Culture and Heritage, Helen Clark, was primarily a book person, didn't really have great enthusiasm for this newfangled media stuff. So I realised that the crucial thing was to convince Michael Cullen, and also in a memo to the Prime Minister, that the way to do a new encyclopedia was on the web. So I basically prepared this overhead saying exactly these points, that if you were going to do an encyclopedia, these were the great advantages. It was multimedia and interactive in a way that a book encyclopedia simply wasn't. It was much more internationally accessible. It would be freely available. At the very time when I was thinking about this encyclopedia, I went off on leave. I went off for about 6 weeks to lecture at the University of Ulster in Belfast. And I wanted to find McClintock so I could sort of look at how he had done it. I could not find a copy of the McClintock Encyclopedia in Ireland. So I began to realise that if you had it on the web, you didn't need to put in an interloan, you'd get it right there. I also realised that the thing about a book is, and you can see it on the cover of a book is pitched at a particular audience. But the great thing about doing something on the web is that it allowed you to sort of layer your audiences, and that if you were going to do a new national encyclopedia, you had lots of potential audiences, both scholars but also kids, and you had to somehow cope with all those audiences, and the web would allow you to do that. It also had the advantage that a book is a sort of self-enclosed object. It has references, but to follow up those references, you've got to write them down, go to a library, order the book, look them up. On the web, you can go to a set of links and go straight through to the document or the image or the other related stories and so forth, so that it was much more open-ended and boundless. And that an encyclopedia on the web, farther from being a closed object, was a sort of open object. It was updatable and correctable. I mean, the problem that McClintock had, that people kept coming back to me and saying, was it's out of date. Something on the web, as long as you've got sufficient staff to continue to update it, not looking at you, Nancy, at this point, it can be a permanent, ongoing, organic thing, which is a huge advantage. And finally, I realised that I could appeal to the politician by saying, if you give us money, you won't have to wait 8 years until we do a whole encyclopedia A to Z and get it published and out in the bookshops. We'll promise to get this something up there before the next election, and people would see the value of your investment. So I don't know what in those arguments convinced him, but as I walked out the door, Michael Cullen said, yep, we'll give you the money. But he was smart, because what he did was give us the money in the next budget of 2001, but say you can't actually use that money until the following year, which was a very good idea, because what it meant was we basically had a year to do all the planning before we could spend any money, which if we'd suddenly been given the money, it would have been panic stations. So it was smart. He probably had a fiscal crisis or something anyway, but I mean, it was a good idea. So I and Bronwyn Daly, who was working in the historical branch at the time, spent the year basically thinking about it, looking at websites, and sort of planning the whole thing. And our first task, I decided the first task really was to think about the content. I mean, I'd worked down at Te Papa, and the message that I'd got from Te Papa was, before you think about design, think about what you are trying to communicate and what you're going to communicate. So I decided that was the place to start. And what I also realised, and this was implicit in my argument to Michael Cullen that we could get something up fast, was that the way to do an encyclopedia on the web was unlike a book where you did things A to Z. You couldn't sort of put up an encyclopedia, this is letter A and this is letter B and this is letter C. That sort of wouldn't work. The way to do it would be to do it thematically. And once you'd done all the themes, then you could have an A to Z. But if you if you did it thematically, it had huge potential. It meant you could get something up fast. It meant that you could bring together, working on a project, experts in that area. You know, if you wanted to do a section on the geology of the country, you could get together the geologists and do that section. And then when you moved on to the government of the country, you could get all the political scientists together. So you could cluster the expertise. You could also cluster, the places that were going to give you images and sound files and so forth. If you were going to do the geology, you could go and build relationships with the GNS and get them to provide resources and so forth. So it had a lot of advantages doing things thematically. It also meant that we could do a launch that sort of catered to particular groups as we did each theme and get them on board, and it would be good for publicity. So I became convinced a thematic way was the way to do it. The next challenge, of course, was to decide, okay, if you're going to do it thematically, what should those themes be? How did you break down the whole of the New Zealand experience into a series of reasonably equally sized themes? Now this was, like cutting up the universe. It was hard. And we spent a lot of time, particularly Bronwyn and myself, brainstorming. And this is a good example of some of the notes. This is a photograph of a whiteboard series of notes we did. Different options, getting us started, established, changing, growing, challenging, enjoying, expressing ourselves. Sort of quite abstract. This one, islands, habitats, journeys, identities, connections, and so forth. You can see fooling around with different ideas. Here's another version. And this time, you'll notice, big thing along the top here, Māori and Pākehā dimensions in all topics. Now, that was a key decision. I mean, one possibility would have been to have said, okay, we'll have one theme that's just Māori. But I was very committed, and we had a number of hui that talked about this. It would be really valuable to do the Māori content alongside the Pākehā content. So that was a key decision. But even so, when I got so interested in this topic, I decided I'll throw my hat into the ring to edit it and give up being the chief historian, and that's what happened. So Bronwyn became the chief historian, I moved over, became general editor, and I remember in May 2002 when I started the job, going into my room, looking at the wall and thinking, whatever do I do now? However, now that I'm paid to do this thing instead of just fooling around on a whiteboard, how do I get this thing off the ground and what do I do next? And I decided that actually what we'd been working on, the kind of thematic thing, was a key. So what I did was I took the old McClintock encyclopedia and I went through it, analysing it, the number of words for each topic and everything, and then I decided the ways in which, if I were doing an encyclopedia now, I'd like to rebalance it. And then what I did was distribute all those entries into different themes to get some sense as to whether or not they'd be about the equal size. I decided what we're going to do is have 9 themes, all of equal size. And so I did it simply by redistributing those McClintock entries, plus adding in quite a lot of emphases and changes in emphases that I wanted to make. And eventually we came through to this theme series, that we would begin right at the very beginning with a thing about the peoples of New Zealand. And the idea about this was, there were 2 basic reasons for it. One was, I thought it would be a good idea to do something which I knew something about, because it would just help the process of developing the website a lot easier if I really was on top of the material, and I'd done a lot of work about the history of migration, and so I was comfortable with that. Secondly, I thought it would be a great way to include everybody in the country. If half of it was about all the different migrant groups, and the other half was about all the major iwi. Everybody in the country would have a stake in the encyclopedia, and it would be a great way of providing a sort of mihi to the country about Te Ara. It'd be a great way of welcoming people into the project. And second and thirdly, I realised that if we had half of it on iwi and half of it on Pākehā groups, it would signal to the Māori community early on that we were serious, and that by going out and telling the story of the iwi of the country, it would be a great way to get Māori buy-in to the project, and it was absolutely true. That's exactly what happened. So we started with that, and then I took a big deep breath and thought, right, now we get into the sciences, which may be odd because I didn't have a scientific background, but I decided that the science would probably date less fast than some of the stuff at the end. So you might as well get it done earlier because it's going to last longer. So we broke it down into 3 sections. One, Earth, Sea and Sky, which is about the geology and the marine world. One on the indigenous landscape, the bush, and one on the farming, the introduced species and the transformation of the landscape, really about farming and the cultivation of the land. And we decided that although these would have a heavy scientific natural history background, we would also do some of the cultural and social elements alongside them. So that, for example, when we're dealing with the sea, we'd have stuff on coastal fish, but we'd also have stuff about surfing and deep sea diving and so forth, or about the nature of the beach itself, the culture of the beach. So we decided to interact the human alongside the natural as much as possible. And then we went to society. This was mainly about rural areas. Then we moved into the city and looked really at the economy of the city, the history of business and so forth. Then a section about government and nation, a section about informal social connections, families, voluntary organisations, religion and so forth. And then on to culture, one about popular culture, which sort of grew very nicely out of the social connections one, and sport, which was about half of that theme. And finally, one on creative and intellectual life, which I thought would be a great way to end. One of the things I'd always been anxious about was how would we keep people on to the end of this project? This was a finite project. How would we get people on to the end? And I thought, if we give them a really good thing to do at the end, they'll hang in there. And they did. It was fantastic. It was one of the great anxieties. Janine's there. She knows how anxious we were about losing everybody. And they didn't. They stayed on and did a fantastic job. So it was. When I look back on the structure, I think it actually worked out well. And what we did is, after this one, where I sort of regard myself as a bit of an expert, each of these other themes, we brought in a theme editor, someone from outside, who could help structure the theme, choose the entries, knew about who the right people were, and that was a great thing to do. So we had a series of people. Nigel Roberts and Stephen Levine, who came in and did the section on government and nation. Rosemary Duplessis from Christchurch, who was in the sociology department and helped do the sociological section. Alan Gillingham really had difficulty finding someone who knew about agriculture, and I tracked down Alan by talking to people, and he had just retired, and he knew everybody in the Lincolns and the Masseys of this world, the DSIRs and so forth, and he was great. So these were the kind of people we brought in. And what also each theme allowed was us to do a focused launch. So this particular launch of the settled agriculture, the settled landscape theme about agriculture, we did at Massey because that was the community. For the government and nation launch, and this is a photograph of Stephen and Nigel at the launch, we did at Parliament in the banquet hall because it was absolutely the right place to do it. So we tried to sort of position each theme around and locate it in a particular and relevant place. Now, of course, there were two other elements apart from these sort of themes in traditional encyclopedias. One was biographies, and if you look at the old McClintock, it's full of biographies. I think there's something like 500 biographies, or it might even be more. I'm not entirely sure. Do you know, Nancy?
No, I'm not sure.
Anyway, there's quite a lot. And I realised we had just done the dictionary. Furthermore, the dictionary of New Zealand biography had been turned into a website in the year 2000. So we were freed of the need to do biographies. In fact, we had superb biographies there, and the thing to do was to do everything possible to build the links so that the complete encyclopedia would have absolutely outstanding biographies as part of its menu. Secondly, every encyclopedia has a sort of gazetteer element. It has stuff about places and about locations and about cities and so forth. And I decided that what we would do with that is actually make a whole theme on places of New Zealand, and that instead of doing that as one integrated theme at one time, we would do it over the whole of the project, because I realised that this would be a great way to take Te Ara out into the regions, and we could go out there, and each time we did a launch, we launched a particular theme, we could really project Te Ara into that particular region. Furthermore, if we take one, I don't know, Marlborough will do, what we then did was divide the places into two sections. One, which, and you can see the outline here, which gives you a sense of the overview of the region, and the other was to do a much more specific gazetteer. So, you know, if you look in this area, the Awatiri Valley, you've got a little section about the Awatiri River, about Black Birch, about Molesworth Station, about Tapuanuku, about Wither Hills and so forth. So we had that gazetteer function incorporated within a general entry about Marlborough. And sure enough, it was a great way to take it to the regions, and the launches we had in the regions were fantastic. What tended to happen was that I would go in and tell about Te Ara in general, and try to pick out local elements from the broader Te Ara theme that you could find. For example, when we did this Marlborough one, I came across this particular little clip in an entry we did on washing.
The town of Sydney in Marlborough has a service that many other towns would be pleased to boast of. This Perrin washing machine service is run by Mrs. Watson. Goes to your home, unloads the washing machine and gets to work. Able to do several washes in one day, this service seems to be the answer to the busy housewife's problem. Mrs. Watson is not one to tarry, and no sooner is the wash done than she's away, and another wash will be done before lunchtime.
So you can imagine the people of Seddon loved that. We also always played this clip about Robert Muldoon, which by popular acclamation, I couldn't avoid it, and I probably can't avoid playing it today.
Just a moment, interviewer to ask questions.
Well, I'm not this is a very important matter for New Zealand. I want you to help me to clarify the issue.
Firstly, to ask individual questions.
Yes, of
I would
course.
be grateful if you would answer them on an individual
Of
basis.
course I will. You're not going to set rules, my friend. This is important.
Brings back fond memories, no doubt. So they were a great success, these regional launches, and as can be indicated by this little cartoon, which the cartoonist in the Waikato, was it the Waikato Times did immediately after the Waikato launch of Nancy's Waikato entry. So you can see what kind of public response it got in the local community. So that was the themes. I'm going to run out of time here. The next sort of big issue really was the structure. I mean, what was going to be the unit of production? It's all very well to have themes, but how would we actually deliver that content? And the first place that I began was in terms of thinking about the audiences. Because as I said, the great advantage of a web thing was to layer the audiences. So we decided that these were the kind of audiences we needed. We would have a sort of general newspaper level student audience, people who wanted, to answer crossword puzzle questions or quiz questions, or were just interested in the background. We definitely needed to aim for the younger generation, for people in school, for kids and so forth. On the other hand, we wanted to provide a background for people who were specialists. Not that people who were experts about penguins would look at the tiara entry on penguins, but if you were interested in other seabirds and you wanted a bit of a quick fix on the latest background about penguins, then you would look at the penguins entry. We had a big obligation, obviously, to Māori, and particularly Māori language speaking communities. And then there were people who are just, and this I'd learned from Te Papa, that when people go into exhibitions, some people go around and read every label and look at everything. Other people walk through and they just graze. They go here, they go there, they go there. And I knew, particularly on the web, that we were going to get a lot of grazers. So we had to satisfy them. So we trialled different things. For example, we trialled this as a short story, not that the language is just is to be recommended, and we mocked up various entries, because we had New Zealand History Net, we could trial various things, which was a great asset. This is a trial of one on the wine industry. This is one about the Irish. So we wrote entries and then trialed them. And so, in order to deal with all these various needs, this is what we ended up with. Just give me a subject, anything, any subject you're interested in.
Education.
Bit more specific.
Whaling.
Whaling, okay. Well, look at that whaling entry, which just by lucky coincidence I happened to write. We'll go here. We'll start here. So basically what we did was, we started with a little blurb on the home page. Something that would give people a very brief taste of what the whole thing was about. Part of this layering of the experience. Then below that, we introduced a short story. And the idea of that was that it would be about 250 words. The language would be simple. For primary school kids doing projects, that would give you a good introduction. And what we found is that it also provides a very good introduction for people who want to know whether or not they want to explore the whole thing. So that was aimed at that level. Then once we got into the main section, the research we did showed us that people reading text on the screen read 25% slower, and they don't want to read too much. So we decided what we would do is break everything down into these pages of about 500 to 600 words. And within that, we would break down each section with little headings so that people who are the grazers can immediately be attracted to that. And furthermore, we would break the thing up with little topic boxes, which are tiny little teasing, interesting things that for people who are grazing might attract your interest. This one says, whaling language, some of which is inspired New Zealand, included such terms as grunters for pigs, spuds for potatoes, weed for tobacco, a heifer for a woman, a titter for a girl, and a squeaker for a child. That was the kind of thing that we did. Then for those who were, specialists, this provided both a bibliography of additional reading and links to other possible items of value on the website. And if you were looking at a Māori entry, then we translated all Māori entries into Māori, and you could move from English to Māori with the click of a mouse. So we didn't translate all Māori entries. There are about 170 that we did. We didn't translate all entries, but simply those which had a substantial Māori content. And there are about 170 of them, and they're all available there in Te Reo Māori. And when you add to that all the Māori biographies plus these entries, you've got a huge body of Te Reo Māori available on the web. Probably the largest body of high quality Te Reo Māori available on the web. And the other thing we did was to go for the grazers. Some people don't like reading. They like looking at pretty pictures. So what we decided to do was to provide a sort of image trail like this. And if people went through and looked at all the images and listened to the sound files and looked at the bits of movie and read the captions, they would actually get a really good sense of what the entry was about. And if they got really interested, they could always flick across to the text. So another whole layer of, experience. Okay, so we had content and we had a structure. We had a unit of production, and preparing a entry broken down like this with this structure. Those were crucial decisions. And we decided all that before we even touched the design. And that, I guess, came from my Te Papa experiences. Work out what you're going to say and what you want to do, and then go to design. So we sent out for tender to our design companies a requirements document that was about 180 pages long. Very specific. And we asked them to respond, and in order to respond, they had to mock up a draft entry. We gave them all the text and we gave them all the resources. Now, the poor people, we gave them this on December the 13th, and they had to have it done by January the 13th, which, as you know, is over the summer. It was not very popular. So I said to them, okay, if you can't go to the beach, at least you can think about going to the beach. So this was the entry that we got them to mock up, a thing on the beach. And this is sort of the way Shift, who were the winning group, this was how they responded. Just let me go back to that Tiara history. So on early in 2003, I think it was, We signed a contract with Shift, and as you can see, the Prime Minister came along to Shift's office along with Geoffrey Palmer, who was head of our committee. That was how important she regarded it as, and the kind of support she gave us was absolutely fantastic. In fact, when in her farewell speech in Parliament, she said that one of the things she was most proud of was supporting Te Ara. So we had terrific support from her, and she launched several of our themes. The next thing we had to do was develop the design a little bit more, so we needed a brand. So we did we'd spent an all-day workshop down at Port Nicholson Yacht Club doing a branding exercise with Kim Wicksteed from Saatchi & Saatchi. And then we went to Designworks with the information, with that idea in mind, and they came up with a logo, the Te Ara logo. And I have to say that I think it's absolutely brilliant. In fact, it got a award for the Best Graphic Design Award in 2004. And it's been a fantastic thing to have that Te Ara design. And they also came up with a strap line, What's the Story? So both of which I think worked superbly. We're very lucky to get them on board. Where are we going to? I'll talk 5 more minutes. The next thing that was really important, having got a structure, having got a theme, was to work on the realisation that if you were going to do a national encyclopedia, this had to be a national enterprise, and you had to get a lot of different communities on board. And on the whole, I can have to say it was easy. In fact, I have never worked on a project where people were more willing to give in a reasonable way than any project I've ever been on. Now, who did we need to get on board? First, as I've already suggested, we needed to get Māori on board, and even in the early days of the planning, we went out to the Māori community and we held 2 hui. One organised by Manaka Henare in Auckland, and one organised by Mason Dury in Massey. And we got their input into it, and also got a lot of support from that community of people who would later write for us. We decided that what we would do is appoint a committee, which came to be called Te Ara Wānanga. And it was chaired by Ranganui Walker, and that was one of the great privileges of my life. We had a fantastic committee, chosen quite deliberately amongst people who really had a rich background in Māori culture and history, but from all the major tribal areas of the country. And we would have these meetings 2 or 3 times a year. They would look at everything to do with the Māori element of Te Ara, and they would also, when we decided on a new theme, what would happen was that the theme editor and myself would sort of brainstorm the entries from a Pākehā point of view. Then we would take that along to the Te Ara Wānanga, and we'd have an all-day brainstorm about what were the things in the Māori world that were worth having subjects on. It was a total privilege. I mean, half of the discussion would be in Te Reo, half of it would be in English, but their support was just brilliant. And it meant that, you know, we got the Māori community behind us, and when we came to do the iwi entries right at the very beginning, let's just go have just a very quick look at that. When we came to do these entries on the major iwi of the country, which was quite a thing because people had actually been trying to do histories of all the iwi of the country for years. Michael King had tried to do it, Aparana Ngata had tried to do it. And we did it basically because the Te Ara Wānanga provided really good suggestions about people in the local iwi who could write about that iwi. And we got some lovely entries that came in. And what was interesting is, by comparison with the entries we got in about the immigrant groups, most of the iwi entries were actually a lot more accurate. because they were written by people who really cared. So that was hugely important, and getting that community behind us was crucial. We had to get the scholarly community behind us, so I went out round universities, round GNS, talking to them, got them on board. Every theme, we had a specialist community of people, geologists looking at geology, sports fans looking at the sports entries, cultural people who'd written about theatre and music and dance, helping to brainstorm that, suggesting the way entries we should have, who should write, and so forth. Huge help. We went out to the library community because we needed them on board. So we went and visited the New Zealand Herald, got a really good deal for getting newspapers from them. We went and talked to the Turnbull Library, got a good deal with them. We went to talk to Television New Zealand, got a good deal to do short clips from them. Spent a lot of time negotiating with all those repositories, and it really paid off. I went to Chris Blake and said, look, what we got to do is get people more interested, the libraries and the archives, about digitising the material. Out of that came the National Digital Forum. So it was a really creative thing to do. Fourthly, we had to get really good staff on board, and we spent a lot of time. And Nancy, I have to say, was crucial in this. We gave, for all our jobs, we gave people little exercises, and judged them on two things really: how good they would be at delivering the exercise, and secondly, how well would they fit into the team. And we got a great selection. For the first lot of writers, we had 250 applicants. We tested 16, and we chose, 4? 3.
Yeah, 3.
Yeah. So we got creme de la creme, brilliant people. And then once we had those on board, then we had to work through other things. We had to work through the workflow, exactly what the workflow would be. And I'm not going to go into this in any detail because I'm running out of time, but this is basically the workflow. It was a very complicated workflow. We had a system which you might see in this little topic box down here: purple, pink, green and yellow. A system of different coloured forms developed to chart the progress of the thousands of resources and captions. Purple sheets were resources that required rights clearances. Green meant the resource had been replaced or changed. Pink was a reminder to publish an unpublished resource. Yellow meant the resource was a map, graph or diagram to be made by the Tiara designers. Yellow sheets were known to fill people with dread when one landed on their desk for checking. So you can see that it was a very, very complicated logistical exercise, and it was great to have Nancy in charge of all that. She had her whiteboard there. I think we've even got a photograph of your whiteboard, haven't we, Nancy? Where is that? Anyway, we did, and so we kept everything on track. We spent a lot of time thinking about how to write, because we realised we had to have text that was clear, that was simple, that was to the point. And I must say, one of the best expressions of that, there's Nancy's whiteboard there. Everything was tracked on her whiteboard, was that we won the Right Mark New Zealand Award for clearest expression of English, which was great because we put so much time into thinking about that. We thought about copyright principles, we thought about graph principles, we thought about map principles and so forth, and all of those things, all the thinking really did pay off in terms of improved communication. And finally, we thought in terms of interacting with the audience. We set up a whole series of things, a What's My Story thing, so people could send in stories. We set up a blog that we'd actually prepared ahead of time, and it was issued within 5 hours of the Christchurch earthquake, all about earlier earthquakes, so people could go onto the site and look at the information we had. And they did, and something like 20,000 people visited it the day after the Christchurch earthquake. So what we got as a result was a fantastic response. This is the number of visitors in the year since we went live. Now running at over 600,000 visitors a month, about 20,000 a day, which is a lot of people to have on a site in one day. It's up with the television sites and so forth, and we published a whole series of books off the site. What we realised is that all the work we'd put into getting good images, clarifying text, providing headings worked even better in books. And this particular book on Māori in the natural world won a prize for the best Māori non-fiction book. So, this little book on the iwi of the country has been reprinted several times. So we made nice books out of it, and we got a number of prizes which sit on the floor upstairs. So I've talked for far too long. I could probably go on talking about this thing for 3 hours, because it was an absolute privilege, great group of people, and a wonderful, wonderful project. So thanks very much.